You join me today at the wheel of something very rare and very special. An SD1 V8 is always a special thing, but this is an actual Rover SD1 police car.
Proud to be sponsored by Diamond Bright, the car care products that have been keeping the furious fleet looking their best for a long time already. To find all you need to keep your car clean and protected, follow the link below to diamondbright.co.uk.
First of all, that didn't go well, and secondly, is that Tomb Raider Land Rover? This isn't just any 1986 Rover SD1 3500 SE. This is a genuine Lancashire Police traffic car, and if you saw this in your rear view mirror with those lights on back in the 80s, you knew you were in trouble. Production had shifted from Solihull down to Cowley in the end of 1981, so by 1982, January 20th to be exact, production was starting for the Series 2 cars, which is what this is. Now there's a number of changes to the Series 2 cars: plastic bumpers, under bumper spoiler, a little bit of chrome trim around the headlights, more flush fitting headlights, and this little black grille underneath the lights and bonnet itself. And around the back, the tailgate glass now completely filled the tailgate, so you had a much better view out the back of the car. Now this particular car joined Lancashire Police in 1986, the last year of SD1 production, and in fact a lot of police forces actually stockpiled these when they went out of production because there was nothing quite like it that the police wanted to replace it with, so they wanted to keep on driving them a good deal longer. And in fact it stayed with the Lancashire Police for 110,000 miles and 3 years until 1989, when it was sold for £2,100. Now the SD1 was already a good handling car, so the police didn't do a great deal under the skin. There are rumours that they did things to the engines, but no one ever really wants to admit to that. However, they did add a lot of police equipment to them, including this light up bar at the front, so you knew it was a police car behind you. Obviously the jam sandwich stickers down the side. The blue flashing light, and some aerials. And being a traffic car, this one got the sign on the boot, the light up police on the left and the flashing stop sign on the right. Now here under the bonnet is what made this thing a favourite with the police forces, the Rover V8 engine. Ever since the P6 had been equipped with this back in the mid-60s, the police forces had loved this. It was the only thing that would keep up with gangsters in stolen Mark II Jags back in the day. And come the 80s, it was one of the fastest cars on the road. Now this is one of the last carburetted models, but being on the verge of EFI, it's also computerised as well. So it's got temperature sensors in various places. The SU carbs have got a stepper motor on the cold start, so it has almost as much control as an EFI engine, although not quite. Those did make a little bit more power. This one was putting out 155 horsepower when it was new. This one has been breathed on a tad with higher flow heads, different camshaft, freer flowing exhaust. It's making around 175 horsepower, and boy does it feel quick. Now whether the police carriages did do anything to these back in the day with a hot cam or any other little tweaks is unknown, but one thing which is blatantly clear to see is this pump here, which powers the two air horns down in front of the radiator. That's not subtle, is it? Inside the car, the SD1 was a big thing, so there was lots of room for the extra police equipment. But because it was a police car, they had to pare it down on terms of the luxury front, so we weren't paying good taxpayers' money for policemen to be lavishly enjoying themselves in a big comfy car. We've got the velour seats, but we've got Cupid windows and manually operated door mirrors. It's all very dark brown. Dark brown plastic, dark brown velour, dark brown carpet. It's quite a dark space to be in. Even the headlining is kind of a beige colour, so very dark indeed. Now the Series 1 cars followed the same trick that David Back had used on the Range Rover, the modular design dashboard, in that there was a glove box and a nice little handhold cutout thing in front of the passenger and a pod of a speedo and rev counter in front of the driver. He used the same trick on the Metro as well when that came out. Now, on the Series 2, he's progressed it a little more, so the entire dashboard is one giant T-shelf. And on top of that, you've got a left or right-hand drive instrument pod, which can be bolted on either side of the dashboard. So, cunningly, only having to make one moulding. And in place of the steering column on the passenger side, you've got a rather peculiar little air vent, which looks a little odd, but it's a clever way of keeping down costs, because keeping down costs of production was the big thing for BL back in the late 70s. The door is very basic. It's got no door pocket, got the manual winder. There is an air vent going up onto the glass. The door handle's kind of a safety thing, like on the Volvos, where it's recessed in here, so in the event of an accident, your door handle won't hurt you. Up on the instrument pod, we've got front and rear fogs, windscreen washers and rear screen heater on these big square buttons on the right. Rev Counter going up to red line at 5,500 RPM because it's a V8, utterly destroying itself at 7,000 RPM. Past a bank of light warning lights, over to the speedo, which goes up to 140, 130 is the last indicated number on this thing. And then a bank of 4 more big buttons. Hazard warning lights, interior light. This red one here though turns on all the police equipment. Then we have 3 more gauges. Fuel gauge, 14.5 gallon tank, that's a big old tank. Temperature gauge and oil pressure. And finally an electronic readout, which is the clock. Now here on the left hand side of the dash, you can't miss it, it's a calibrated police speedo up to 140 miles an hour. So if you're blatting down the M1 at 83 miles an hour, and they say you're doing 83 miles an hour, that is a speedo that determines that. I believe there used to be a loophole. If that hadn't been calibrated or checked in a certain length of time, you could contest their opinion of the speed, but I don't know if that's still valid or not. Now in the centre of the dashboard you can see 2 little lines pressed into the plastic. That is because when this car was first went into service, that speedo was mounted here in front of the air vent, but service records indicate that original one broke and it was replaced, and instead of replacing it here, it was put up here on the T-shelf. And next to that we've got our police buttons. We've got the button for the police light on the front of the car, the stop light on the back of the car, the horn, and the beacon on the roof, the little blue light. Down where the radio would normally be, we've got the Pi Whitehall police band radio. This is a nice little blue thing. The radio telephone handset is hanging down here on the left hand side. Push to talk, little button on the middle of it. This is original equipment. Not all of this is actually from this car, but is all the actual correct equipment that would have been in this car. Then we've got the clock and stopwatch, so we can time people's speed and so forth and get real-time accurate speeds if you're going to prosecute someone for speeding. This would give you that information. Then we have the 5-speed gearbox. All manual SD1s came with the LT77 5-speed. The LT77 was designed around the time of this car as a modular thing, so they could put a 4-speed and a 5-speed in the same casing, with or without the 5th ratio, which is technically kind of an overdrive gear. But these all came with the 5-speed. They have a big chunky handbrake, and then the loudspeaker for the Pi police radio. This is the White Knight Torch center console on a permanent charger ready to be grabbed. Now, these seats are big and comfy. They're very squishy and nice. They're not as buckety as they were in the P6, but they are very comfortable still. And very, well, we do love a bit of velour, as I'm sure I've mentioned previously. Now, normally, you would only be sitting in the back seat if you were having a stern talking to. So, as far as the police are concerned, comfort back here wasn't the primary consideration, but as far as Rover were concerned, it was. And it's actually a lot better back here than it was in the P6 before it. You do sit very low in these lovely velour seats, and you've got fairly good headroom, but the big difference between this and the P6 before it is the knee room. Even with the police jacket on the front, it's a lot more comfortable, a lot more spacious than it ever used to be. We do of course still have keep it windows. You can now see the courtesy lights in the door post. There is also a third courtesy light up in the centre, which is added for the police use. We've got 3 seat belts across the back, 2 inertia wheels, 1 lap belt in the middle, and quite unusually for an 80s car, this is a luxury car of course, 12-volt socket and an ashtray here in the back. Right, the boot of this thing, being an SD1, is cavernous. It's not very tall, same as any other SD1, but underneath the carpet there is, underneath the carpet there is a huge space and a spare wheel. Originally, as again police spec had to be lower than general public spec so that we weren't spending our frivolous things like carpet, this would have been vinyl lined. The controls have changed slightly from the Series 1 because they've moved from a right hand to left hand indicator in line with like a safety directive. I think about 1981 that was. The light switch is actually down here, a tiny weeny toggle behind the steering wheel, quite hard to see. Reverse is way over to the left and quite a shot to get it into the gear. It's quite strange rolling in a police car. I am with a 5.0, except of course I'm not. And to that end, I've had to cover up all the police signs, remove the police sign from the bonnet, take off the blue lens from the lamp on the roof. So no one's going to mistake this for an actual police car. Not that I really think they would, because these have been out of service for like 5 years. So only people with a very long memory would know what it was. While I was filming, some lads came up, texted a photo to the granddad, and the granddad said, "Oh, a jam sandwich." So yeah, when they start driving in a year or so's time, they aren't going to confuse this with an actual police car. Now the thing about an SD1, which I've not driven one for a while and I've kind of forgotten, is how enormous they feel. They feel really, really wide. The steering wheel's like a massive bus wheel, and The pedals feel like big and well spaced, the seat feels wide, the transmission tunnel feels wide, the car feels wide. It just does feel enormous. And the V8 is a beautiful engine. A nice Rover V8 is always a lovely thing to be behind. But this one is particularly fruity with that stainless exhaust. You can hear a little bit of a tinkling joy from down there somewhere where it's going into the wire pipe into from the manifolds. Just so much torque. It's a trundle along, so in top gear, just brush the throttle and even then it just wants to go. The gear change, being an LT77, is a tad agricultural. They always are. They're a tough gearbox, but they do feel more at home in a Sherpa. And you can imagine a police driver just rowing this thing frantically, getting the best out of it on a back road somewhere. Because going is not a problem. Stopping, though, is a little different. This has got discs up front, but all SD1s had drums on the back. The hot models, the Vitesse, the Vandenplas, EFI, they got 4-pot vented discs on the front, but they still got drums on the back, which are very powerful for the first stab, but repeated stabs of the brakes, they will fade off. They can't dissipate the heat rapidly enough. Now you may have noticed the 15-inch lattice wheels on this car. Being an SE, because the trim level went no letter, S to SE up into the name variants, the Vitesse, the Vandenplas, the VP and the EFI. This one is an SE, so firmly in the middle. It would have come with alloy wheels, but a smaller size, less exciting pattern. The owner fitted this one because, well, it really looks better, but also some police forces actually specified these wheels were fitted because they're larger and have better heat dissipation of the brakes. The SD1 really was pared down drastically from the P6. Everyone knows the P6 was one of the most ridiculously over-engineered cars you're ever likely to sit in. The Dion rear axle, the horizontal springs on the front in case they stuck a jet engine in it, all that stuff made it horrifically expensive to build and develop, and that just wasn't going to fly anymore with the new face of British Leyland. So, originally, this started as the Rover Triumph 1, the RT1, which was a competition between Rover and Triumph engineers to come up with a replacement for the Triumph 2000 and the Rover 2000 and all the variants of those cars. But because BL was cutting things back to the bone, which is not a good move when we try to build luxury vehicles, only one car was going to be built, and it was a competition between the Rover P10, this, and the Puma, and obviously this one. Now Spen King, who had been made chief engineer of Triumph after the BL merger, was familiar with both companies. He'd been at Rover his entire career, so he was made chief engineer on the thing. David Bash, he was put in charge of the styling once again. He was a wonderful stylist. And under the skin, Gordon Bashford, who'd also been on the P6 project and many other Rover cars, was given the job of chassis engineer. And so he had to make silk purse handling and refinement from sow's ear budget. So it has McPherson struts up front, trailing arms and a torsion tube rear. And of course, it's far cheaper to build a monocoque chassis than it is to build a separate chassis and body, and it was the future as well at that point. So this is a full monocoque car, and it's one of the first cars to use a bonded windscreen as well, that bonded windscreen becoming part of the structural integrity of the vehicle. And tell you what, it did a blooming good job, because I'm doing 70 miles an hour at the moment, and I actually didn't realise how quickly I was going. I was just thinking, I'm not going that fast, I should put my foot down to experience this. I'm already doing 70. I hope the GoPros are still outside, because I wasn't planning on going this quick at the moment. this thing is rapid! Holy beans, this is incredible! I can't tell you how fast I'm going because the speedo just stopped working. Okay, this is probably about 60 or 70, but it got here in a hurry. So, this is one of the most conspicuous cars I've ever driven. I drove the Hustler recently, which was a wooden car in case you haven't seen that, and everyone stared at that. This though gets a whole bunch of different stares. When everyone in the car park I was filming this stopped to come and have a look and talk and take a photo. People just crane their eyes. I'm amazed they haven't crashed into things just turning to stare at it. They absolutely love it. I know the owner is deeply fond of this car. He's put a lot of time and effort into restoring it. It's actually nitro silver if you have a look at his channel. See, when you're just pootling, you're in low revs, not really pushing it at all, it's just silky smooth, buttery. Then you put your foot down and it just wails. It's magical, it's so good. It's so stable at speed as well. With rack and pinion steering, which is another improvement over the previous Rovers. It's so accurate through corners. They did a brilliant job of turning, well, what they had, which was a very tight development budget, into a brilliant bit of machinery. The problem, of course, for Rover and the SD1 as a whole, I mean, despite winning Car of the Year in 1977 across Europe, two things happened. First of all, there was the next oil crisis occurred, and so suddenly big engine luxury cars were a bit of a white elephant and they weren't a popular thing anymore. At the same time, the legendary British Leyland build quality struck. The early cars had lots of issues. There's stories of cars arriving with a rattle in the door and it's a beer can behind the door card. That kind of thing. So loyal Rover customers would step up and buy them at first, but as products like Audi and BMW were getting better, the Granada Mark II was a fantastic car as well. And if you had the budget for it, a W123 from Mercedes, possibly the best car ever built, was also out there as an option. So only the diehards bought it for a while. As the car's life cycle went on, the quality did improve. And to the time of the Series 2s, when this was built, they'd ironed out most of the faults and the finickitiness, and so people bought them and loved them. The police loved these things. They were fast, they were huge, they were comfortable. And I would be happy to sit behind this engine noise all day, which is what those guys did. And they really could hustle. If you've not seen the liver run, go and find that on YouTube. It's on a police SD1 with a fast police driver had to get from Stansted Airport to a hospital in the centre of London before the patient died and this liver expired. And it is some epic driving. Because these were the sharks of the motorway back in the day, from the late 70s to the end of the 80s. If you saw this distinctive silhouette appearing in the distance, oh, you hit the brakes or you just let off the accelerator very quickly. Such an iconic design. And David Batch's design was always going to be the winner. It was far more radical and exciting. A hatchback in a saloon market back in the early 70s when the proposals went ahead was a big deal. Apparently the original styling buck though was not that exciting. It was a bit angular and a bit boring, and he kind of knew it. So over one weekend he got all the staff in, borrowed a Maserati Ghibli and had them kind of graft the Ghibli's curves onto his angular hatchback, and then, as everyone knows, borrowed the headlamp design from a Ferrari Daytona of the day, and suddenly the SD1 was born and became an icon that everyone knows. Someone's just taking my photo again and the car behind right now. Well, thank you for joining me in this frankly epic Rover SD1 V8. Driving it has been an absolute pleasure and an honour, so thank you Nitro Silver for the loan of the car. If you want to see more of this car, check out his channel. If you've liked this, please hit like and subscribe as always, share on Facebook and do all the usual gubbins. Join me again next time for something which I guarantee will be totally different.